Something is happening over Iran right now that every American needs to stop and pay attention to, because what just got revealed changes the entire picture of this war. And almost nobody is talking about what it actually means. You know how sometimes a story breaks, and on the surface it looks like one thing, but when you start pulling at the threads, when you actually go back and look at the timeline of what has been happening over the last several weeks, you realize there is a far deeper, far more unsettling story buried underneath. This is one of those moments. Iran, a country that the United States military just days ago told the American people had no functioning air defense. A country whose radar systems were declared completely destroyed. A country over which U.S. bombers were flying almost freely. That same Iran just demonstrated to the world a military capability that nobody in Washington wanted to admit existed. And when an American F-18 nearly got taken out of the sky and an F-15E actually did come down, the question every American should be asking is not just how, but why didn't we know, and what else don't we know? Let's go back to the beginning of this, because context is everything here. On February 28, 2026, the United States military launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran under the direction of the President of the United States, with U.S. and partner forces striking targets designed to dismantle the Iranian regime's security apparatus. In those first days, the operation was described in almost triumphant terms. Over 5,000 targets were struck, 50 Iranian vessels were damaged or destroyed, and the firepower deployed was staggering. B-1 bombers, B-2 stealth bombers, B-52 bombers, F-22 stealth fighters, F-35 stealth fighters, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. The full, devastating weight of American air dominance was brought to bear on Iran. And for weeks, it looked like Iran had nothing left to fight back with in the air. The message coming out of Washington was clear. Iran's air defenses had been obliterated. The skies over Iran, the American people were told, belonged to the United States. That is the backdrop you need to hold in your mind, because against that backdrop, what happened on March 25, 2026, was genuinely shocking. Iran's Revolutionary Guard claimed it shot down a U.S. F-18 fighter jet over southern Iran, marking what Tehran described as its fourth interception of Western military aircraft using domestically built defense systems. Now, the United States Central Command pushed back fast. CENTCOM denied the claim, posting on X that no U.S. fighter aircraft had been shot down by Iran. But here is where you have to slow down and actually look at what was happening in that footage, because the video that circulated, the video even CENTCOM shared while denying the claim, told its own story. Footage shared online, including by Iran's state-linked press TV, appeared to capture a fighter jet in flight before a sudden flash occurred close to the aircraft. Moments later, the jet seemed to become unstable, trailing what looked like a plume suggesting damage or loss of control. The plane didn't go down that day. CENTCOM was technically correct in that specific instance, but the flash in that footage, that bright, sudden detonation near the tail of a $70 million American fighter jet, that was real. Something was fired at that aircraft. Something nearly hit it. And what that something was matters enormously. The F-18 Super Hornet was conducting a low-altitude strafing run against targets in Chabahar in the daytime on March 25th, likely using its M61A1 20mm cannon. The manpads used was probably a domestically manufactured Misag missile, an Iranian clone of the Chinese QW-1, launched from the ground near Chabahar. The pilot responded to the launch by performing a high-G brake turn, forcing the missile to overshoot. Think about that. The pilot survived because of exceptional skill and split-second reflexes. 1 fraction of a second differently, 1 degree of turn less aggressive, and we are talking about a downed American pilot in Iranian territory. And this is what Iran was calling its new advanced air defense systems, and they were not wrong to call it that, because this particular weapon, the Misag, is something Iran has been quietly building for years, largely under the radar of Western intelligence attention. Now, before we get to the truly alarming part of this story, and there is a truly alarming part, let's talk about what a manpads actually is, because this is the weapon that changed the course of this war, and most Americans have no idea what it is or why it matters so much. Manpads is an abbreviation for Man-Portable Air Defense System. Each is essentially a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile. The first manpads were developed in the 1950s and 1960s, but were initially constrained by rudimentary targeting systems. Using infrared heat-seeking guidance, manpads lock onto an aircraft's heat signature, the engine exhaust. The guidance system allows the user to fire and forget, meaning they require very little training to operate, making them ideal for guerrillas and insurgent movements. You can fit one in a truck, you can hide one in a building, you can position one on a rooftop in a coastal city and wait, and you only need one person to fire it. Manpads have a range of 3 to 6 miles and are generally effective below 15,000 feet. That is the critical number, to below 15,000 feet, because when American pilots are flying strafing runs, when they are doing close air support, when they are flying low to hit specific ground targets with precision, they are operating well within that envelope. They are, at those moments, vulnerable in a way that no stealth technology, no advanced radar jamming system, no billion-dollar electronic warfare package fully protects against, because manpads do not use radar, they hunt heat. And every jet engine in the sky produces heat. Iran's Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces Logistics has domestically produced the Misag series of manpads, whose stockpile quantity has not been publicly disclosed. That phrase, not been publicly disclosed, Odor was doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. It means nobody on the outside knows how many of these things Iran has. And what we are learning now in real time is that the number appears to be very, very large. Thousands of portable air defense missile launchers may be scattered across Iran, including the domestically produced Misag series and possibly pre-delivered Russian Verba systems. Thousands, scattered, across a country the size of Alaska. There is no headquarters you can bomb to neutralize that threat. There is no command node you can strike with a Tomahawk missile to turn it off. Each launcher operates independently. In December 2025, Iran inked a $700 million deal with Russia in Moscow to buy 500 Verba manpads launchers and 2,500 missiles. The Verba missile is infrared guided and has a range of about 6.5 kilometers. So even before Operation Epic Fury began, Iran was actively building out this capability, this specific, distributed, hard-to-destroy, shoulder-fired capability, as though they knew, or at least anticipated, that their conventional radar-guided air defense systems might one day be taken out. And then the moment that confirmed everything happened on April 3rd, 2026. April 3rd, 2026 was the pivotal turning point of this war. Just 48 hours earlier, Trump had declared in a primetime national address that Iran had no air defense equipment whatsoever, that radar was 100% destroyed, that American forces were unstoppable. 48 hours later, an American F-18E Strike Eagle was shot out of the sky over Iran. And then, during the rescue operation to find the crew, an A-10 Warthog was hit as well. Iran shot down an F-15E and 2 A-10s in a single day, the first time in over 20 years that U.S. combat aircraft were downed by enemy fire. Let that sink in. More than 2 decades. And it happened not with some sophisticated Russian S-400 system or a cutting-edge Chinese radar battery. It happened with shoulder-fired missiles, with weapons a single person can carry. A shoulder-fired missile is considered the likely weapon because Iran's air defense system had been obliterated, which was evident when slow-moving and vulnerable B-52 Stratofortress bombers were used in late March to hit missile production facilities in Iran. This is the paradox at the heart of what is happening right now. The United States succeeded, genuinely succeeded, at destroying Iran's conventional radar-guided air defense network. The big systems, the S-300s, the Bavar 373, the radar stations, those were systematically dismantled over weeks of relentless strikes. And precisely because that happened, Iran shifted its entire defensive posture to the one weapon type that cannot be targeted the same way. The Mosaic defense is a strategy devised for the eventuality when Iran's top military leadership is eliminated and the military communications network is destroyed. At its core, it means organizing the military architecture into 31 independent units comprising surviving elements of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Basij Force, and the regular army, each organized under a single subunit with its own arsenal and weaponry. They planned for this. The dispersal was intentional. The decentralization was deliberate. This was not improvisation. This was a strategy that had been designed in anticipation of exactly what happened. Iran's air defenses remained effective despite weeks of U.S.-Israeli strikes. Fixed long-range sites were heavily degraded, but widely dispersed mobile systems, including man-pads and truck-mounted launchers, preserved engagement capability and survivability. Tehran's doctrine emphasizes mobility, concealment, and independent operation, complicating targeting and enabling continued denial of uncontested airspace despite claimed degradation. The phrase, denial of uncontested airspace, is the key strategic concept here, and it is worth spending a moment on what that actually means for American pilots and American military planning. It does not mean Iran can shoot down every American aircraft that enters its skies. It means Iran can force American aircraft to fly higher, to change tactics, to accept more operational risk, to devote more resources to protection rather than strike missions. And the economic math of that is staggering. A man-pads missile costs tens of thousands of dollars, whereas an F-18 costs $70 million. You are looking at a cost asymmetry in the range of 1,000 to 1 or more. Iran does not need to win. Iran does not need to shoot down an American carrier air wing. Iran needs to make the cost of operating over its territory high enough, persistent enough, and unpredictable enough that the political and military calculus in Washington shifts. That is asymmetric warfare in its purest, most economically ruthless form, and it is working. There is no obvious way for the United States to confront this threat. Presumably, there are thousands of man-pads launchers scattered throughout Iran, and each one is capable of operating on its own, meaning there is no central command node to target. This requires American aircraft to operate at a higher altitude, reducing the effectiveness of close air support. Higher altitude means less precision. Less precision means more civilian casualties, more collateral damage, more international condemnation, more pressure on Washington. The domino effect of this one weapon system, this one small, portable, shoulder-fired missile, radiates outward through the entire strategic picture in ways that are deeply consequential. And now comes the layer of this story that should concern every American, regardless of where they stand politically on this conflict. According to 3 U.S. officials familiar with recent intelligence assessments, Beijing is preparing to transfer shoulder-fired man-portable air defense systems to Iran within weeks, potentially through third countries designed to conceal the weapon's Chinese origin. China, preparing to send more man-pads to Iran right now. While U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance is in Islamabad conducting negotiations aimed at ending this conflict, China is reportedly positioning itself to make Iran's most effective remaining weapon even more potent. The allegation is strategically explosive because it emerges precisely as U.S. officials are conducting high-level negotiations with Iranian counterparts, while China simultaneously presents itself publicly as a mediator seeking regional de-escalation. A mediator. That is what Beijing is calling itself. A mediator who intelligence officials believe is shipping weapons to one side of the conflict through back channels while publicly counseling peace. If that is true, and 3 U.S. officials say it is, that is one of the most cynical geopolitical maneuvers we have seen in years. President Donald Trump reacted with an unusually direct warning, declaring that if China does that, China is going to have big problems, while his administration has already threatened 50% tariffs on any country supplying military equipment to Iran. The Chinese embassy in Washington rejected the allegations, but the intelligence assessment stands, and the timing is not coincidental. China depends heavily on Iran's oil and wants to remain on friendly terms with the country. Both China and Russia have had long-established military and economic relationships with Iran. And Russia, for its part, has not been idle in this conflict either. Moscow has provided formidable intelligence assistance during the war by locating U.S. assets, a detail that should give every American a chill when they think about what it means for operational security in a war zone where Russian satellites and signals intelligence may be feeding real-time targeting data to Iranian forces. What all of this adds up to is a picture that is far more complicated, far more dangerous, and far more geopolitically layered than the story that was being told to the American people in those early, triumphant weeks of Operation Epic Fury. The Iran that was destroyed, the Iran with radar stations and missile batteries and centralized command structures, that Iran is largely gone. But the Iran that survived, the Iran that is fighting back right now, is a different kind of Iran. It is an Iran of thousands of dispersed fighters, each holding a shoulder-fired missile, each operating independently, each capable of sending a $70 million American aircraft and its crew crashing into the mountains of western Iran or the waters off Chabahar. Some U.S. analysts considered the downing of the F-15E in Iran, followed by the destruction of several rescue aircraft, as limitations of U.S. air superiority. An NBC News article commented that despite the U.S. effort to neutralize the conventional military capabilities of Iran, the threat of asymmetric warfare endured. The threat of asymmetric warfare endured. That sentence deserves to be read slowly and thought about carefully, because the deeper truth embedded in everything we have been talking about tonight is not just about this war, not just about Iran and the United States in 2026. It is about what happens when the most powerful military in the history of the world faces an adversary that has studied its vulnerabilities for decades, that has built and stockpiled weapons specifically designed to exploit those vulnerabilities, that has dispersed those weapons so widely that no bombing campaign can eliminate them all. From a shoulder-fired missile costing tens of thousands of dollars to the potential fragmentation of a nation of 80 million, the completeness of this causal chain is genuinely alarming. America is in a conflict right now where the winning is complicated, where the enemy adapted, where the secret weapon turned out to be something that fits in the trunk of a civilian car. And the world is watching, China is watching, Russia is watching, to see whether the most powerful nation on earth can figure out an answer to a problem that its own defense establishment admits has no easy solution. That is where we are. That is the real story behind the headline. And every American who cares about where this is going deserves to know it.